My name is Clara Whitcomb. I was 32 years old, the morning my parents fired me in front of 84 employees. They called it a family decision. It happened on a Monday in October. It was the kind of gray Ohio morning where the sky looks like wet paper and every fluorescent light in the office feels a little too honest. I had just dropped my daughter, Tessa, at school. She was 7, still small enough to forget her lunchbox in the back seat, still old enough to notice when my hands shook on the steering wheel. By the time I walked into Whitcomb Medical Supply, the conference room doors were already open and people were standing where they normally sat. That was my first warning. My father, Martin Whitcomb, stood near the front desk in his navy suit, the one he wore whenever he wanted bad news to look respectable. My mother, Elaine, stood beside him with one hand pressed to her chest, already grieving the decision she had helped make. Behind them, my younger brother Preston held a glossy proposal folder for the Silver Oaks expansion, smiling like the future had finally chosen him. "Clara," my father said, loud enough for the billing team to hear, "the company needs a stronger direction now. Not a private conversation, not a closed door, a lesson." My mother stepped forward. "Honey, maybe this is a blessing. Tessa needs you. You should focus on being a mother." That was how they did it. They never called me weak. They called me tired. They never called me inconvenient. They called me overwhelmed. They never said a single mother made the company look messy. They just kept finding softer words for shame. I didn't cry. I unclipped my badge, placed it on the counter, and packed my daughter's framed school picture, my chipped coffee mug, and the blue cardigan from the back of my chair. But I left one thing on my desk. A navy folder, with a yellow note on the front. "Do not sign before reading page 47. 10 minutes later, my father found it. And Russell Kane, our CFO, stopped breathing when he saw my handwriting. "Now, let me tell you the whole story. Let's skip the interruptions and get back to the story now. If it is above 43%, comment 1. If it is below 43%, comment 2. Let's see which answer wins today. If you want to help us keep telling these kinds of stories, thank you. I'll tell you how after the story. Every little bit keeps the lights on here and lets us write the next chapter. Thank you, everyone, for staying with me through this. Now, let's begin the story. I need to tell you what that folder meant, but to understand why my father dismissed it so easily, you have to understand the place I had occupied in my family long before that Monday morning. I was not hired at Whitcomb Medical Supply. I was given a chance. That was the phrase my father used 9 years earlier. When I was 23, and sitting across from him in the same office, where he later decided I was disposable, he slid a thin employee packet across his desk and said, "I'll give you a small role in operations. Don't make me regret it." I had just finished my healthcare administration program at Sinclair Community College, not a university my parents could brag about at church, not an MBA, not the kind of framed diploma that made people lean closer at dinner parties. Just enough education to understand billing codes, patient intake forms, Medicare documentation, delivery schedules, and the thousand small mistakes that can turn a medical supply company from helpful to dangerous. My mother smiled, like my father had handed me a house. "A lot of daughters don't get this kind of safety net, Clara," she said. "You should be grateful." So I became useful in the only way they allowed. Quietly. I checked delivery notes before sunrise. I caught missing physician signatures. I called nursing homes when a wheelchair cushion looked wrong on an invoice. I learned which vendor always shipped late, which clinic forgot to update patient weights, and which insurance reviewer would reject a claim if one box was marked in blue ink instead of black. Nobody clapped for that kind of work. Nobody mentioned it at Sunday dinner. But when it was done wrong, families called crying, nurses yelled, and patients waited in beds they could not safely leave. Preston, meanwhile, was still in business school, sending my parents articles about scaling legacy companies. My father printed them and kept them in a leather folder on his desk. My mother underlined sentences like they were scripture. At dinner, they talked about his vision, as if he had already saved a company he had never opened at 6 in the morning. My first compliance warning sat unread in the printer tray for 3 days. When I finally brought up 3 Medicare forms that had been coded incorrectly, my father kept carving roast chicken and said, "Clara, don't turn dinner into an audit." Preston laughed. My mother gave me the look she used when she wanted me to shrink without making her ask. Across the table, Marisol Keene from HR had stopped by to drop off paperwork and stayed for dessert. She heard every word. She glanced at me once, like she wanted to say something, then reached for her water glass instead. That was how most people survived in my parents' orbit. They noticed the unfairness. They named it privately. Then they folded their hands and let me carry it. That night, after everyone left, I drove back to the office. The building was quiet, except for the vending machine humming near the break room and the old copier clicking itself to sleep. I printed the first warning email I had sent about those billing codes. Then I printed the delivery notes, the rejected claim, and the correction request from the clinic. I put them in a plain white binder, slid it onto the bottom shelf beside my desk, and wrote 3 words on the spine in black marker. In case needed. I thought I was protecting the company. I had no idea I was saving myself. 5 years after I wrote, "in case needed" on that binder, Whitcomb Medical Supply hosted its first major donor dinner at Brookmere Country Club. My father called it a community fundraiser. Bianca Vale called it positioning. I called it what it was: a room full of people deciding whether our family looked polished enough to be trusted with their aging parents. Several administrators from Silver Oaks were there, along with clinic owners, donors, and people my father wanted to impress before the expansion talks became official. I arrived straight from work, with Tessa holding my hand. She was 4 then, wearing a yellow sweater with a tiny juice stain near the cuff. The babysitter had canceled 20 minutes before pickup, and I had spent the drive telling myself it would be fine. Tessa was quiet. I had packed crayons, apple slices, and the little paperback she liked to pretend she could read. I thought my parents would understand, which tells you how much of me was still trying to believe they were different people. My mother saw us from across the lobby. Her smile stayed on her face, but it stopped being warm. She crossed the carpet in quick, careful steps and touched my elbow like she was guiding me away from a crime scene. "Clara," she whispered. "Why is Tessa here?" I said, "My sitter canceled. She'll sit with me." Elaine looked past me toward the ballroom. "Tonight is not the night to bring your complications into the room." I looked down at my daughter. Tessa was tracing the gold pattern on the carpet with one shoe. "My complication has a name," I said. My mother's eyes sharpened. "Don't make me say something cruel just because you want to be offended." That was Elaine's gift. She could make a wound sound like your fault for bleeding. Before I could answer, Bianca Vale appeared beside us with a clipboard pressed to her chest and the calm face of a woman moving pieces on a board. Bianca looked at Tessa, then at me, then at the seating chart. "We can make a small adjustment," she said. She never insulted me. That was what made her dangerous. She only rearranged the room until the insult looked like logistics. A small adjustment meant my place card disappeared from the family table. I was moved near the kitchen doors beside 2 warehouse supervisors. A vendor kept checking hockey scores on his phone. Tessa colored quietly beside me while my father stood beneath the warm lights. He thanked my mother, Preston, Russell, Bianca, and the next generation of Whitcomb leadership. He did not say my name. Preston lifted his glass when people applauded. My mother dabbed the corner of her eye as if pride had overcome her. Across the room, an older woman leaned toward her husband and asked, not softly enough, "Is that the divorced daughter?" Tessa stopped coloring. After dinner, I found the first draft of my father's speech in a trash bin near the coat room. My name had been typed in the second paragraph, then crossed out in blue ink. Beside it, in Bianca's neat handwriting, were 4 words: "Remove her from family optics." That was the first time I understood they were not overlooking me. They were editing me out. A few months after Brookmere, I stopped expecting my family to make room for me in public. I did not stop doing the work. That is the humiliating part about being useful to people who do not respect you. They can remove your name from a speech, move your child beside the kitchen doors, and still leave your responsibilities waiting on your desk the next morning, as if dignity and duty had nothing to do with each other. The first call came at 6:12 on a Thursday in February. I remember the time because Tessa was still asleep, one sock missing under her blanket, and I was standing in the kitchen trying to pack her lunch with my phone wedged between my shoulder and my ear. The voice belonged to Nora Bellamy, a retired head nurse who consulted for one of the senior care homes we supplied. Nora did not call to gossip. Nurses like Nora call when silence has become unsafe. "Clara," she said, "I need to ask you something before I make this official. That sentence will wake you up faster than coffee." A patient at Millstone Manor had received the wrong pressure relief cushion for his wheelchair. The prescription called for a high-grade gel cushion because he had a history of pressure sores. What arrived was a lower-tier foam model, the kind that looks similar in a delivery photo if nobody cares enough to read the code. For a healthy person, it would have been uncomfortable. For him, it could mean wounds, infection, and weeks in bed. I set Tessa's sandwich down and asked, "Was it billed as foam?" Nora went quiet for half a second. "That's why I called you." I drove to the office before sunrise with Tessa's backpack on the passenger seat. Her school did not open until 7:30, and our building was only 12 minutes away. The warehouse lights were already on. Harold Finchley's old radio played low near the loading bay. He counted returns with a pencil tucked behind his ear. "Little early for you, Clara," he said. I told him, "Something doesn't match." He did not ask what. People who spend their lives around inventory know that sentence has weight. At my desk, I pulled the Millstone Manor order, then the invoice, then the billing record. The cushion delivered was coded as the lower-tier model in the warehouse log, but billed under the higher-grade Medicare code. Once could be a mistake. Twice could be a tired clerk. By the 7th file, my hands had gone still on the keyboard. 14 orders across 3 facilities had the same shape. Cheaper equipment shipped. Higher code billed. Small enough to hide inside volume. Large enough to matter if someone with authority decided not to see it. I printed the first report and walked it to Russell Kane's office at 8:05. Russell was our interim CFO, though he wore the word interim like an insult. He had silver hair, frameless glasses, and the calm, polished manner of a man who could explain a house fire as a temperature event. He read the first page, then smiled without showing teeth. "This is a clerical variance," I said. "No, a variance is when 2 forms disagree. This is a patient getting one product, while Medicare is billed for another." Russell tapped the paper once with his pen. "You've been under stress, Clara. I understand that. Single parenting, family expectations, all of it. But don't make a pattern out of what may be entry noise." There it was again, not wrong. Emotional, not careful. Overwhelmed. I took the report to my father anyway. Martin was in his office with Preston and Bianca, reviewing mock-ups for the Silver Oaks expansion packet. The cover had a photo of smiling older adults on a porch, all sunlight and clean blankets and trust. I placed the report beside it. "We need to pause any Silver Oaks language until we audit these orders." Preston leaned back. "You want to stop an $18 million expansion over cushions?" I said. "Overbilling for equipment we didn't provide." Bianca lifted the report with 2 fingers, like it might stain her. "The wording is a little severe. Billing discrepancy. Sounds accusatory." My father rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Clara, we appreciate your attention to detail, but this company cannot panic every time you find a paperwork issue." That afternoon, I sent the report by email to Martin, Elaine, Preston, Russell, and Bianca. I attached the 14 orders, Nora's call notes, and the warehouse logs. The subject line read, "Urgent. Billing discrepancy review required before Silver Oaks expansion." 2 days later, a forwarded version came back from Bianca. Same report, same 14 orders. But the subject line had been changed to "Clerical Variance Summary No immediate action required. I stared at those words for a long time. Then I opened the attachment and realized the file name was no longer the one I had sent. The file name stayed in my head for the rest of that week, not because it was dramatic, but because it felt too neat. My original report had been named the way I named everything: plain and ugly, millstone, billing, discrepancy, review, Clara W. The version Bianca sent back was called Silver Oaks, calm summary, final. That word sat there like a lid being pressed down. A warning had become a summary. A discrepancy had become a variance. A patient had become a public relations inconvenience. I saved both versions. Then I saved the email headers. Then I printed everything and added it to the binder on my bottom shelf. I did not know yet who had changed the file, but I knew something had shifted in the room around me. By then, it was the February before my parents fired me, nearly 3 years after Brookmere. Tessa was 7. Old enough to read the mood on my face. Too young to understand why adults hide cruelty behind paperwork. 3 weeks later, I received a notice from HR at 4:36 on a Friday afternoon. Cowardly decisions often arrive when people hope you will spend the weekend too tired to fight them. The subject line said, Benefits Classification Update. I opened it while Tessa sat on the floor beside my desk, drawing a purple house with a crooked chimney. I read the first paragraph twice before the words became real. On paper, part of my job had been moved under temporary project support, even though my week, my hours, and my responsibilities had not changed. My position had been reclassified. My workload was still full-time. My father's expectations were still full-time. But according to the new internal classification, I was no longer eligible for the family health plan at the same contribution rate. Tessa's coverage would remain active for 30 days. After that, I could move her to a private dependent plan that cost almost $900 more per month. Tessa looked up from her paper. Mommy, why are you making that face? I folded the notice before she could see it. Just reading something boring. That was the first lie I ever told my daughter to protect her from my parents. I walked to Marisol Keene's office with the paper in my hand. She saw me coming and looked down at her keyboard, like she'd remembered something she didn't want to do. Her door was open. I stepped inside anyway. Who approved this? Marisol swallowed. Clara, I'm not supposed to discuss classification decisions beyond the written notice. I said her name once. Not loud, just enough. Her eyes lifted, tired and guilty. Elaine requested the review. Russell approved the financial impact. Your father signed it. There are moments when anger comes hot. This one came cold. Tessa had asthma. It wasn't severe. It didn't bother her every day. It was enough that I kept an inhaler in my purse, one in the kitchen drawer, and one at school. Enough that a bad winter could turn into urgent care before dinner. I went to my parents' office. Elaine was sitting behind my father's desk, which told me everything before either of them spoke. Martin stood by the window. Preston was there too, the Silver Oaks proposal tucked under one arm. I put the notice on the desk. You cut Tessa's insurance. Elaine sighed like I had disappointed her by noticing. No, honey. We adjusted your classification. There is a difference. I said. She is 7. Elaine folded her hands. And you are her mother. At some point, Clara, you have to learn not to depend on this company for every part of your life. I looked at my father. You signed this? Martin did not turn from the window. Your mother and I have carried you for a long time. Carried me. The word almost made me laugh. I thought of the warehouse logs I checked at dawn, the claims I corrected after hours, the patients whose equipment I chased down while Preston talked about scale on glossy paper. Preston tapped the folder against his palm. Maybe this will help you focus. The company can't keep bending around your personal situation, I said. My personal situation is your niece breathing through a plastic tube when her chest gets tight. Russell appeared in the doorway then, as if he had been waiting for the temperature to rise. He looked at the notice, then at me. Clara, If you continue framing ordinary business decisions as retaliation, we may have to document that as disruptive conduct. That was when I saw what this really was. The insurance notice was not only pressure, it was bait. If I raised my voice, I became unstable. If I cried, I became overwhelmed. If I warned them again, I became disruptive. I picked up the notice and folded it once, slowly. I want every communication about this classification preserved, I said. Elaine's expression flickered for half a second. Not fear. Irritation that I had stepped out of the role she had written for me. I left without slamming the door. In the hall, Marisol was standing by the copier with her arms wrapped around a stack of files. She waited until I passed, then slipped a blurred photocopy into my hand, so quickly it looked like an accident. Her voice was barely more than breath. "I shouldn't give you this," she whispered, "but they're preparing more than insurance." I did not unfold the photocopy until I was in my car with the doors locked. The paper was warm from Marisol's hands and blurred at the edges, like it had been copied in a hurry while someone watched the hallway. Across the top, in Bianca Vale's clean formatting, were the words transition strategy, reducing dependence on CW. For a moment, I just sat there with the engine off, listening to the rain tick against the windshield. CW, not Clara, not daughter, not even employee. Initials were easier to remove. The memo was only 2 pages. It weighed more than the binder on my bottom shelf. Bianca had written that my personal sensitivity to patient-facing concerns was slowing strategic growth. Russell had added a note in the margin. Compliance review should be reassigned before Silver Oak's execution. Elaine had underlined one sentence in blue ink. Position transition as support for Clara's family needs. It did something worse. It taught them how to remove me while sounding compassionate. I wanted to march back inside. I wanted to put the paper on my mother's desk and ask her what kind of woman uses her granddaughter's inhaler as a business tool, but anger is expensive when you are already standing on ground someone else owns. So I drove to Tessa's school, sat in the pickup line, and folded the photocopy into the pocket of my coat. When she climbed into the car, she smelled like crayons and cafeteria pizza. "Did you have a good day, Mommy?" she asked, because children learn to check on you before they learn long division. That night, after Tessa fell asleep, I opened every file I had saved for the last 18 months. One by one, they stopped looking like separate incidents and started looking like parts of the same plan. The original billing report, Bianca's softened version, the HR notice, Nora's call notes, the warehouse logs, and the forms with my name, still attached to reviews I had not completed. I did not know yet how deep it went, but I knew enough to stop trusting the people who kept telling me I was overreacting. I made copies. Then I made copies of the copies. The next morning, I called Owen Marlowe from the parking lot of a Kroger, because I did not want the call touching the company Wi-Fi. I had met him once at a healthcare compliance seminar, where he had said something I wrote down on a napkin. A warning ignored is still a warning received. When he answered, I did not tell him family drama. I told him facts. Wrong cushion, higher billing code. Edited report. Reclassification, Silver Oaks moving forward. He listened without interrupting, which felt almost strange after years of being corrected mid-sentence. Owen told me he could not formally advise me until he reviewed the documents, so I sent them through a secure link that night. Then he said, carefully, "If a company knows about billing irregularities and signs an expansion anyway, that changes the question." I asked, "Into what?" He said, "Intent. One word. Small enough to fit in the air between us. Heavy enough to change the room I was sitting in." Before we hung up, he told me to preserve metadata, original emails, timestamps, and anything showing who saw what before the contract was signed. For the first time, I understood that the safest thing I could do was let them think I was still alone. That afternoon, I opened the Silver Oaks folder and found the latest schedule. The signing date had been moved up by 48 hours. To Monday morning, the same Monday my parents would later call everyone together and tell me I no longer belonged. Monday morning began with a voicemail from Nora Bellamy. I listened to it in the school parking lot while Tessa unbuckled her booster seat and searched for the library book she had misplaced under her backpack. Nora's voice was lower than usual. Clara, I need to know if you're still handling Silver Oak's trial orders, because your name is on a final review form from Friday night. And if you signed off on that pressure relief cushion, we have a serious problem. I watched Tessa wave through the glass doors, and I felt the floor of my life tilt under me. I drove to Whitcomb Medical with Nora's voicemail playing again through my speakers. My name was still on forms I had not touched. That was not a mistake. That was a hand reaching back after pushing me out, trying to leave my fingerprints on the door. When I walked in, the office already felt staged. People were standing near their desks. The conference room lights were on. Preston's Silver Oak slide deck glowed on the screen. The first slide read, "A New Era of Care." My father stood in front of the room with Elaine beside him. Russell stood near the wall with his arms folded, the careful expression of a man already sure the match was fixed. Bianca held her phone at her waist, not recording, exactly, but ready. Harold Finchley stood by the warehouse entrance, cap in both hands. Marisol was beside the copier, pale enough that I knew she had seen the final script before I did. Martin cleared his throat. Clara, after careful review, we've decided your role no longer aligns with the future direction of this company. This is not punishment. This is alignment. He said it kindly enough that a stranger might have mistaken him for a father in pain. Then Russell stepped forward. We've also discovered several unresolved compliance issues under Clara's department. We are reviewing whether those concerns were escalated appropriately. That was the blade, not the firing, the placement of blame. I heard a small sound move through the office. Not shock, adjustment. People were deciding how to remember me while I was still standing there. Harold looked down. Marisol pressed one hand to the copier, as if she needed it to stay upright. My mother came toward me and opened her arms. For a second, the room saw comfort. I felt her fingers close hard around my shoulder. She leaned in and whispered, "Don't make this worse. Think of Tessa." That was when something inside me went very still. Not calm, not peace. Something older than both. I looked at my mother's face, at the practiced sadness, and finally understood she would use my daughter's name as a lock to keep me quiet. I did not answer her. I walked to my desk while everyone watched. I took Tessa's framed school picture first. Then the cardigan from the chair, the emergency inhaler from my drawer, and the little box of pens she had covered in stickers. Then I placed my badge on the counter. I left the navy folder squarely in the center of my desk, the yellow note facing the aisle. Do not sign before reading page 47. I did not explain it. I did not point at it. I simply walked to the elevator. Behind me, no one spoke. But as the doors began to close, I saw Russell's eyes land on the folder and all the color leave his face. For about 12 seconds after the elevator doors closed, nobody moved near my desk. Later, Harold told me the silence felt different from the silence during my firing. That first silence had been cowardice. This one was recognition, the kind you get when a piece of paper carries more weight than the person talking. Preston broke it first. "Throw it away," he said too quickly. "She wants attention," Bianca agreed, without looking at the folder. "This is emotional staging, don't reward it." But Russell did not move. His eyes were fixed on the yellow note. Do not sign before reading page 47. My father noticed his face before he noticed the folder. Martin Whitcomb was many things, but stupid was not one of them. He had built a company from a rented storefront and 3 delivery vans. He knew what fear looked like on a man who handled numbers for a living. "Russell," he said, "why are you looking at that like it's alive?" Russell cleared his throat. "We should review it, just to be thorough." That was when Elaine folded her arms. "Clara has always known how to make ordinary moments dramatic." Preston laughed. But it landed wrong, and died fast. My father picked up the navy folder and opened it on my desk instead of taking it to his office. I think part of him still believed the room belonged to him, and that opening something there let him control it with his voice. The first pages were copies of emails I had sent over 18 months. Not summaries. Originals. Each one had a date, a subject line, recipients, and attachments listed beneath. My father frowned at the first one, then the second. "I never saw this wording," he said. Bianca leaned over. "Because the wording was inflammatory. It had to be adjusted for clarity." Harold, still by the warehouse entrance, lifted his head at that. Marisol looked at the floor. A small shift, almost nothing. But small shifts are how rooms begin to turn. Then my father reached page 47. I had placed it behind a red divider tab. Owen Marlowe's legal analysis was short enough for a busy man to read, and serious enough that no busy man could pretend he had not. It said that if Whitcomb Medical Supply signed the Silver Oaks expansion after receiving documented internal warnings about incorrect equipment billing, altered risk language, and final review forms, bearing the name of an employee, removed from the process, the company's exposure could change from administrative error to knowing misrepresentation. Preston stopped smiling. Elaine said, "That is one lawyer's opinion." Russell said nothing, which made the opinion louder. My father turned to the next page and found the chart. 14 orders, 3 facilities, 2 product categories, every one matched to a warehouse log, invoice code, and billing record. Beside them were the 3 final review forms carrying my name after my access had already been restricted. If they use my name, ask where I was. That was the first crack they could hear. Martin looked up. "What does that mean?" Bianca answered too fast. "It means Clara is trying to create doubt around standard documentation." But my father was no longer looking at Bianca. He was looking at Russell. Russell finally reached for the page, then stopped himself before touching it, as if fingerprints had suddenly become dangerous. "Electronic signatures can carry over," he said. "Systems do that sometimes." From the copier, Marisol made a sound so small it might have been a breath. My father flipped to the back pocket of the folder and found the sealed USB in a clear evidence sleeve. Across the label, in my handwriting, were the words, "Original files. Do not alter." The room changed then. Not dramatically, no one shouted. No one confessed. But Preston shifted away from Russell. Elaine's lips pressed into a hard line. Bianca lowered her phone. My father held the USB between 2 fingers and asked the question I had waited weeks for him to ask. "Who changed my daughter's reports before they reached me?" No one answered. Russell looked at Bianca. Bianca looked at the Silver Oak slide still glowing on the conference room screen. And for the first time that morning, the people who had fired me began to understand that I had not left them a folder. I had left them a record. The room had the evidence, but evidence does not make guilty people honest. It only makes them careful. By the time I reached my apartment, Martin had not called me. Elaine had not texted. Preston had not apologized. What I got instead was a message from Marisol, sent from her personal phone. "They're still moving forward. 10 a.m. tomorrow. Conference room. Silver Oaks will be there. Russell is telling them you were unstable." I read it twice, then set the phone face down so Tessa would not see my hands. That night, my parents chose the story they wanted to survive. Clara had been emotional. Clara had misunderstood routine billing language. Clara had left a dramatic folder because she could not accept a business decision. Bianca drafted the language. Russell prepared clean summaries. Preston told my father that delaying the contract would make him look weak. And my mother, because she knew exactly where to press, said, "If we stop now, she'll think she can control this family forever." I did not answer any of them. That was important. People like my parents knew how to fight tears, anger, pleading, even explanations. They did not know how to handle silence that wasn't a sign of submission. I called Owen Marlowe and told him they were going to sign anyway. He was quiet for a moment, then said, "Then we don't stop them from walking into the room." We make sure they cannot walk out with the same story. By 11:40 that night, the pieces were in place. Owen had the original files and the email metadata. Nora Bellamy agreed to attend as the clinical consultant who first reported the equipment mismatch. Harold Finchley sent me photographs of warehouse logs from Friday night. Marisol forwarded the meeting invite and the version history showing my access had been restricted before my name appeared on the final review forms. None of them were saving me. They were confirming what I had already preserved. The next morning, I dressed the way I had for work for 9 years. Dark slacks, low heels, gray blazer, hair pinned back so no one could describe me as frantic. I packed Tessa's lunch, checked her inhaler, and walked her to the school doors. She hugged me longer than usual. "Are you going back to Grandma's office?" she asked. I said, "For one meeting." She nodded like that explained enough. Children do not need every detail to know when a door matters. At 9:52, I walked back into Whitcomb Medical Supply without a badge. No one at reception stopped me. Maybe they forgot Unmuk. Maybe they wanted to see what would happen. Through the glass wall of the conference room, I saw my father with a pen in his jacket pocket, Preston arranging proposal folders, Bianca whispering to Russell, and my mother sitting straight-backed beside the Silver Oaks representatives. They thought I had come to beg. I had come to let them finish lying in front of witnesses. The conference room went quiet when I opened the door. Not the polite, quiet people make when a meeting starts. The other kind. The kind that comes when they've already been told who you are. Then you walk in, and you're nothing like that warning. My father was standing near the head of the table with his pen still tucked into his jacket pocket. Preston looked annoyed before he looked worried. My mother's face softened immediately, because she put on that softness when she wanted witnesses. "Clara," Elaine said, "if you came to talk like an adult, we're willing to listen." My father did not sit down. "Do you want your job back?" "No," I said. "I want you not to sign a contract built on documents you know are wrong." Preston gave a short laugh and looked toward the Silver Oaks representatives as if inviting them to share the joke. "This is exactly what I meant. She's upset about yesterday, so now she wants to punish the company." Russell folded his hands on the table. "For the record, the compliance concerns Clara is referencing were within her department. We are reviewing whether she escalated them properly." I looked at him. "You're saying I was the final reviewer?" "You signed the forms," Russell said. "Say that clearly." He hesitated, but arrogance is a bad editor. "Yes, your electronic approval is on the final Silver Oaks trial reviews." I opened the folder I had carried in and placed one page in the center of the table. That approval was entered at 9:43 Friday night. Bianca leaned back. "Electronic systems timestamp automatically. That doesn't prove anything." "No," I said. "This does." I placed the urgent care check-in record beside it. Then the email I had sent Marisol at 8:12 that night, telling her I was leaving with Tessa because her breathing had turned sharp after dinner. Then the pharmacy receipt for the refill I picked up at 9:37. The Silver Oaks woman at the far end leaned forward. "My daughter and I were at urgent care when my name was put on that form," I said. "So before anyone signs anything today, I want Russell to explain who used my approval after my access had already been restricted." No one moved. Even my mother forgot to look wounded. Russell's mouth tightened. Shared credentials sometimes remain active during transitions. Owen Marlowe, seated beside Nora Bellamy, spoke for the first time. "That is not a defense. That is a control failure." My father turned slowly toward Russell. "You told me Clara failed to escalate." "I told you what the record showed," Russell said. I slid the second page across the table. "Then let's talk about who changed the records." I slid the page toward Russell, but I kept my fingers on it for one extra second. Not for drama, for memory. It was the first time in my life that a room full of Whitcombs waited for me to finish speaking. "This is the original email I sent about the millstone orders," I said. "This is the version Bianca forwarded 2 days later." Owen clicked once, and both documents appeared on the screen side by side. One said, "Billing discrepancy review required." The other said, "Clerical variance summary." Bianca crossed her legs slowly. Language gets adjusted all the time. That's communications. She sounded calm, but her thumb kept rubbing the edge of her phone. I nodded. Then, you won't mind the metadata. Owen opened the file history. The room saw the change log. Russell's workstation at 9:50, 1 p.m. Bianca's laptop at 10:03. Subject line changed. Risk paragraph removed. Attachment renamed. Nora Bellamy made a small sound under her breath. Not surprise. Recognition. Russell leaned forward. That does not mean I changed the substance. Harold Finchley stood then. His chair scraped so loudly that Preston flinched. Harold was 68 and 2 months from retirement. He had never once raised his voice in that building. You told my warehouse staff to ship by invoice code and stop calling Clara for confirmation, he said. Russell snapped. That is not what I meant. Harold looked at him. It is what you said. Marisol placed one more document on the table with both hands, as if it were fragile. Transition strategy. Reducing dependence on CW. My mother inhaled sharply. Bianca said. That was a staffing memo. I turned to Elaine. You underlined the part about calling my removal support for my family needs. Her eyes filled instantly. I was trying to protect you. I said. No, you were trying to make it sound kind when you took away my voice. Preston pushed back from the table. You've always hated that I was chosen to lead. I looked at my brother, really looked at him, and felt no anger left. Just exhaustion. Preston, you weren't chosen because you understood this company. You were chosen because you never asked what happened after you promised more than we could safely deliver. The Silver Oaks representative closed her folder. That sound was small, but my father heard it like a door locking. Martin turned on Russell first. You told me this was paperwork. Russell pointed at Bianca. She wanted the language softened. Bianca's face hardened. I didn't create false codes. I managed the image your family wanted protected. Then my mother said the quiet part out loud. We just needed Clara to stop making everything harder. Nobody defended her. Not even Preston. And for the first time, the room understood. I had not been the problem they removed. I had been the warning they ignored. The Silver Oaks representative stood first. Her name was Adrienne Cole, and until that morning she had spoken in the careful language of contracts. Now she closed the folder in front of her and said, Silver Oaks will not sign today. Not until an independent compliance review is completed. Preston's face went white as if he'd been hit. My father reached for the table, not to sit, just to steady himself. The $18.6 million deal my family had polished for months sat dead in the middle of the room. Russell tried to recover first. Men like him always do. Martin, you still need me to explain the financial systems. I looked at him and said, No, you know where you hid the mistakes. That is not the same as understanding the system. Owen asked that they preserve every record. By noon, Russell was suspended. By the following week, outside counsel had the billing files, the altered reports, and the access logs. His severance disappeared before his nameplate came off the door. Bianca called it a misunderstanding of strategy, until Marisol produced one last email. In it, Bianca had suggested describing me as an unstable single mother if I pushed back publicly. My mother read that line twice and could not think of anything to say. Bianca's contract was terminated before she left the building. Preston lost the Silver Oaks project and followed me into the hall, furious. You ruined my future. I turned back. No. You built your future on work you refused to understand. The hardest part came later that afternoon, in the same open office where they had fired me. My father stood before the employees and said my name like it cost him something. The compliance issues were not caused by Clara Whitcomb. She raised concerns repeatedly, and I failed to read them fully. No one applauded. It was better that way. Applause would have made it too easy. Harold apologized in front of the warehouse team. Marisol cried when she restored Tessa's coverage. I accepted the correction. I refused to excuse the silence. Elaine found me in the break room, where I was taking my mug from the cabinet. I was trying to protect the family, she said. I looked at her and finally understood that I no longer needed her to understand me. No, Mom, you were protecting the version of the family that made you look good. Her mouth trembled. You don't know how hard motherhood is. I picked up Tess's inhaler from my bag. I do. That's why I would never use my child's safety to keep her quiet. I did not return as their grateful daughter or their obedient employee. I agreed to 6 months as an independent compliance director, reporting outside the family. Every warning was locked, where marketing and finance could not rewrite it. 3 months later, I opened my own small consulting office. The navy folder sits in my bottom drawer now, the yellow note folded inside. They thought I left them paperwork. What I really left was their last chance to read the truth before the truth read their names. The lesson Clara's story leaves behind is not only about paperwork or a company or a family that chose image over truth. It is about something quieter and more painful, the danger of letting other people set your worth so long you almost start to believe them. Some families do not reject you loudly. They do it politely. They call control concern. They call punishment support. They call your boundaries disrespectful, your warnings dramatic, your pain inconvenient. If you love deeply, you may spend years explaining yourself to people who still profit from keeping you misunderstood. Clara kept working because she believed loyalty meant staying useful. She protected the company. She protected patients. She protected her daughter. But for too long, she forgot to protect the one person everyone kept asking to carry the weight, herself. That is a lesson many of us learn late. Love should not require you to disappear. Family should not cost you your dignity. And being strong does not mean staying silent while people rewrite your story. Sometimes strength is not a dramatic speech. Sometimes it is saving the email, keeping the record, walking out without begging, choosing your child's peace over your parents' approval. The most powerful part of Clara's journey is that she did not become cruel to survive cruel people. She became plain-spoken. She stopped asking people who harmed her to admit she mattered. She built a life where their approval was no longer the roof over her head. And maybe that is what healing really looks like. Not revenge. Not bitterness. Not pretending it never hurt. Healing is the moment you can look at the people who once controlled your fear and say, quietly, you do not get to decide who I am anymore. So, if this story touched something in you, tell me in the comments. Have you ever had to walk away from people who only valued you when they could use you? And if you want more stories about family betrayal, resilience, justice, and finding your voice again, please subscribe to the channel. Your support helps this community grow, and your story may be exactly what someone else needs to feel less alone today.